For 20 years, the streets of Dodge City looked perfectly controlled on your television screen. Matt Dillon walked tall, the law held firm, and everything that could go wrong stayed just out of sight. What CBS never wanted you to know was that Gunsmoke, America's longest-running primetime Western, was running a second operation entirely, one built on buried footage, silenced cast members, threatened careers, and scenes so explosive that network executives ordered them destroyed rather than risked. The show that millions trusted was held together, season after season, by a machine of secrecy that few people on the inside ever fully talked about. James Arness had no real interest in becoming Matt Dillon. The role felt like a trap to him, the kind of single character that could swallow an actor's entire career and leave nothing behind. CBS pushed hard anyway, and when Arness kept hesitating, the network made their position plain. They would recast without him. That pressure worked, though the tension of that negotiation never fully left the production. Early screen tests made things worse, as some of the gunfight footage from the never-aired pilot was graphic enough that CBS censors pulled it immediately, including one moment that showed Dillon shooting a man in cold blood. The network called it too brutal for American homes, cut the footage entirely, and the show barely survived long enough to find its audience. The relationship between Arness and Dennis Weaver started decently enough during the early seasons, but as Gunsmoke grew into a national institution, the dynamic between them shifted. Weaver felt that Chester was being edged out, that the best scenes and the most camera time kept flowing toward the lead, and the quiet frustration on set became something the crew privately called the Dodge City Cold War. That tension broke open during a fight scene between Dillon and Chester that was written to be controlled and safe. Both actors pushed it harder than the script called for. The movements turned rough, and Weaver ended up genuinely injured on camera. CBS ordered the scene reshot in a calmer version and had the original footage destroyed, so that no audience would ever see how physical it had actually become, and the incident hardened an already difficult relationship that the production worked hard to keep from leaving the set. Amanda Blake dealt with her own set of buried moments. A wardrobe malfunction during a busy saloon scene was captured cleanly on camera, and CBS reacted by ordering every frame of that footage burned. A separate bar fight episode was shelved entirely after Blake's dress tore during the action. Accidental, but enough for the network to pull the broadcast and never reschedule it. Milburn Stone, who played Doc Adams with calm authority for years, drew his own line when a script arrived containing a medical procedure he considered both morally wrong and medically dishonest. The argument with the producer escalated until Stone walked off the set entirely, and rather than replace him, CBS deleted the scene. Doc Adams vanished from the screen for 5 episodes while the studio fed the press a story about rest and recovery, and only the cast and crew knew what had actually happened. The question of what Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty meant to each other had floated through the show for years without resolution. Writers finally built a script that brought it into the open, and Arness and Blake filmed a quiet, gentle kiss in the saloon. Simple, respectful, and long overdue given how much time those two characters had shared. CBS killed it the same week. Their standing rule was firm. Dillon had to remain a strong, independent lawman with no romantic entanglement on record. Editors cut the kiss. The footage went into studio storage, and former employees later claimed it was quietly destroyed, so no version of it could ever be recovered. Blake was deeply upset, believing the scene had finally given Miss Kitty an honest moment that audiences had been waiting for. Arness was less attached to the romantic angle, but grew increasingly frustrated by how tight CBS's grip on creative decisions had become, and 3 separate attempts by the writing staff to bring back even small hints of that relationship were each shut down with the same message: Dillon stays distant, and that is final. A stagecoach scene that should have been routine turned into one of the most serious accidents in the show's history. The horses pulled sharply in the wrong direction, the coach tipped hard, and Arness was thrown to the ground before the structure partly collapsed around him, leaving him with 2 broken ribs and a cracked vertebra while cameras captured the entire moment. CBS locked the footage away, and crew members were told not to speak about it publicly, with fans receiving only a brief statement about a minor setback that said almost nothing about reality. A separate incident involving Weaver nearly ended far worse. Filming a river scene, he slipped into deeper water. His heavy costume dragged him under, and for several seconds the crew kept rolling because they assumed he was performing. The moment they understood he was genuinely in danger, people jumped in after him. The rescue turned chaotic and desperate, and the footage was locked away under the same logic. Keep the public calm, keep the image clean, and say nothing about how close it actually got. A third accident during a duel scene brought a horse down directly onto a stuntman, injuring him badly enough to require immediate hospitalization and legal action, along with insurance claims sealed most of the details under confidentiality agreements while the duel was quietly written out of the script. One of the most powerful episodes Gunsmoke ever produced never reached a single television screen. Writers built a story around racial violence in Dodge City, showing how prejudice shaped everyday life and how the marshal was forced to confront it directly. The cast filmed the entire episode, and people on set considered it among the strongest work the show had ever done. But when CBS screened it for sponsors, the objections came back immediately. The subject was called too volatile, too risky for the audience they depended on. Because sponsor relationships kept the show financially alive, CBS pulled the episode and stored it away without ever broadcasting a frame. A second buried episode told a story about Dillon shooting an unarmed man during a heated moment, a morally complex look at what even a trusted lawman was capable of, and executives panicked when they saw the first cut and ordered it reshot so that Dillon only wounded the man in self-defense, with the original negative buried in the studio archives and possibly destroyed afterward. A third storyline explored Dillon's difficult youth through flashbacks, was filmed and screened for a test audience, and was pulled when viewers responded poorly. The darker backstory made Dillon feel weaker to them, and CBS replaced all the flashback material with stock footage rather than let any of it air. An affair between 2 cast members, both of them involved in committed relationships outside the show, spread across the entire set after a crew member walked in on them, and within hours, everyone knew. CBS moved fast, warning both actors directly and instructing every member of the staff to say nothing to the press, then removed a soft romantic moment that had already been written for an upcoming episode, because producers had no interest in putting that particular on-screen closeness in front of an audience that might connect it to what was happening off-camera. Blake had her own direct confrontation with the production team when a script arrived that she felt was designed to push Miss Kitty aside, and when her objections were dismissed, she walked off the set. A saloon scene filmed just days before was shelved immediately to avoid drawing attention to the tension. The studio described her absence as a brief break, and though she came back after things cooled down, her relationship with certain producers never fully recovered. A guest star with a strong public reputation arrived on set visibly drunk one day and, during a rehearsal run-through, pulled out his prop gun and fired it into the air in front of the entire cast and crew. Security arrived, production shut down, and CBS kept him on the schedule because his name drew viewers, so writers spent the night cutting his scenes down to almost nothing, and the version that aired gave him barely any presence on screen. Writers once drafted an experimental version of a serious episode in which Matt Dillon gets shot and dies, the idea being to test different emotional endings and see what a story about Dodge City without its marshal might actually look like. Arness disliked the concept from the start, believing that Dillon stood for something that should not be taken apart even as a hypothetical, but the producers filmed the death scene anyway over his objections. CBS reviewed it, and their response came back immediately: "You cannot kill America's marshal." and the footage was locked away at a level so deep that former employees later said no one could file an archival request for it. What pushed Arness over the edge was a rumor that the network might eventually use the death footage in a special broadcast, and he went directly to producers and made the situation plain. If that footage ever surfaced publicly, he was done with the show. Losing Arness would have ended Gunsmoke on the spot. The standoff froze production for nearly a week, and CBS eventually gave him their word that the scene would stay buried permanently. Milburn Stone's health deteriorated during his later years on the show, and the long filming days wore on him in ways that became harder to conceal. Writers built a hospital scene to explain Doc Adams's coming absence, a genuinely emotional performance from Stone that felt honest about what he was going through. But CBS reviewed the footage and decided it was too graphic for evening television, cutting the entire scene and giving viewers a simplified explanation instead. Blake's final season carried its own weight. She filmed a barroom confrontation during that period in which Miss Kitty voiced her frustration openly after years of being pushed to the side. Strong and direct work, and CBS said the character came across as too angry and refused to air it. Arness carried a chronic leg injury from his time in the Second World War through most of his years on Gunsmoke, and during one filming session his body gave out mid-scene. He collapsed during what was supposed to be a simple walking shot. The cast and crew initially thought it was part of the performance, and only when it became obvious the fall was real did anyone move. CBS deleted the footage, reshot the moment after he recovered, and the public never knew it had happened. Executives were reportedly worried enough about a collection of behind-the-scenes outtakes that they ordered the reel destroyed entirely. People on set described footage of Arness losing patience with broken props, Blake slipping during a dance scene in a long dress and laughing it off, and a horse choosing the worst possible moment during a dramatic close-up to do exactly what horses do. The crew erupted and the entire take had to be reset, and according to longtime production members, the outtakes reel was eventually eliminated to prevent it from leaking during a period when television stars were expected to project a flawless public image. A separate filming session for a tense, dramatic shootout became something else entirely when the cast simply could not stop laughing. Every time cameras rolled, someone broke, and the scene dissolved. So editors had to cut together the small, usable fragments where no one was visibly smiling, and the full uncut version was locked away to protect the episode's tone. Federal agents contacted CBS directly over a Gunsmoke episode centered on corrupt federal officials taking bribes and intimidating Dodge City residents, and the message they delivered was clear. Airing the story risked creating public distrust of real federal agents and could bring legal complications. CBS pulled the episode immediately, stored the footage, never put the subject back on the schedule, and instructed the cast and crew not to discuss it. A separate episode already in production ran into a different wall when national headlines about gun violence created an immediate problem. The script included a child picking up a gun during a tense moment, and CBS ordered the scene removed, staged a last-minute reshoot, and aired a revised version that included a clear lesson about the dangers of handling weapons instead. Both situations pointed to the same reality. What audiences saw on Gunsmoke was shaped as much by outside pressure as by anything the writers ever intended. A script calling for the death of a beloved character sent the main cast into open resistance. Arness, Blake, and Stone all refused to film. The production effectively stopped, and CBS worked through the night with the writers to rewrite the ending and keep the character alive. One scene had already been completed before the cast could intervene. A body discovered in the Long Branch saloon, dark and realistic enough that executives decided on the spot it could not air. The footage was locked in the CBS vault and declared unbroadcastable, and afterward an unspoken agreement settled over the cast and production. No one would discuss what had almost happened. The near mutiny would stay off the record, and the episode would air in its sanitized form as though the original version had never existed. For decades, that is exactly what happened. and Gunsmoke kept its clean face pointed toward the audience while everything that actually held it together stayed buried somewhere the cameras could never reach.